thank two distinguished senators who are joining us today and who have been a great supporter of our people in Kurdistan, and especially at difficult times when Turkish forces invaded Syrian Kurdistan and now occupying great part of it. And they have started ethnic cleansing, including all the constituents in those regions, including Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, Assyrians, Yazidis, and they don't really distinguish between any of them. As long as they are original inhabitants of those places, they have to leave. Chris, thank you so much for everything you have done for our people, you and Senator Blackburn, and thank you very much. And your constituents who are Kurds in Tennessee, they speak highly of you and what you have done. And your principles always transcends what's going on in politics in this country, and that's really very important for us. It's very important for United States of America. And today, after what was called a ceasefire and Turkey crossing the border of Syria, we have hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced and homeless. Their homes have been occupied by jihadists who are supported by government of Turkey, and you have probably heard in just the last few days significant attack by these jihadist groups with help of the Turkish military on the area around Tel Tamer, where many Christian villages have been forced to leave their places, and now they are refugees in camps or along their relatives, and some of those have come into Iraqi Kurdistan. And we have a panel after the remarks by our two distinguished senators. Of course, Senator Van Hollen is my senator. I'm from state of Maryland, but Senator Blackburn, you are also my senator because of what you do for our people. And we're honored to have both of you here. So I'll have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking Nejmuddin and Dr. Karim and his leadership at the Washington Kurdish Institute and the whole team there for bringing us together today at this very important moment. I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague, Senator Blackburn, who has been very engaged on this issue from the very start. In fact, we worked together when we were both in the House of Representatives on issues to make sure that the United States kept its word and its commitment to the Kurdish people, and in the current context to the Syrian Kurds. It's great to be here with the president of the Syrian Democratic Council, and I want to thank Ilham Ahmed for her leadership, for her people, and for justice. You've been here in Washington working hard to make sure that the United States does the right thing, and I want to thank you for all of your efforts at this critical moment in the history of the region. I also want to thank the other panelists who you're going to hear from because we're gathered here at a very critical point, both for our Syrian Kurdish allies, but also for overall American interests in the region and our fight against ISIS. In fact, just this week, you may have seen the Inspector General at the Pentagon issued a report that was very clear in its findings, and he indicated that the President's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northeast Syria had paved the way for Erdogan's offensive against the Kurds and, importantly, has hindered our fight against ISIS. Also very pleased to be joined by Senator Warner, who is a colleague from across the river, the Potomac River in Virginia, and also Senator Lindsey Graham indicated that he would try to drop by. He's at a hearing right now, so you can see we have a bipartisan group here. But this is a critical moment, and I think we should focus on this report from the Inspector General at the Pentagon, who's already talking about the harmful consequences with respect to our fight against ISIS. The Inspector General said, and I quote, "ISIS has activated sleeper cells to increase attacks against the SDF." He goes on to say that, quote, "ISIS will probably operate more freely across areas of northeastern Syria to build clandestine networks and will attempt to free members detained in SDF-run prisons," end quote. In fact, we already know from this administration's own testimony, Ambassador Jeffries has said that over 100 ISIS prisoners on northeastern Syria. As the Turkish-backed forces include some very, very bad elements. You have jihadi forces that include a lot of people with connections to al-Nusra and al-Qaeda. And their goal, make no mistake, is to ethnically cleanse this area in northeastern Syria. That is their goal, and they're using brutal tactics to accomplish that goal. In fact, Ambassador Jeffrey testified that the conduct that we've seen since the invasion included war crimes. That's coming from Ambassador Jeffrey of this administration. And we also know that there are credible reports that Turkish-backed forces have used white phosphorus in their attacks on Syrian civilians. We also know, and again, Dr. Karim mentioned this, that the Turkey and the Turkish-backed forces have violated the so-called safe zone, right? So this was the so-called safe zone first negotiated by Vice President Pence. Turkey violated that. Then Turkey did a deal with Russia, and they have violated that safe zone agreement as well. Dr. Karim mentioned the actions taken around the town of Tal Tamir, but there are also other actions that Turkey has taken outside the so-called safe zone. President Erdogan has also boasted that he has established a hit squad to execute, to assassinate the leader of the SDF military forces. That is General Mazloum. And that's despite the fact that our own government has recognized that our Syrian Kurdish allies gave us very important information leading to the killing of Baghdadi. In fact, we know where Erdogan's head is because he has compared Baghdadi to Mazloum. So he's comparing the leader of ISIS that is our sworn enemy to the military leader who has led the forces against ISIS. That's where you see the president of Turkey's head. So it's really important, given all of these factors, that we not reward this conduct by Turkey. This is not the kind of conduct that should get you an invitation to the White House. This is the kind of conduct that requires a strong response from the United States and our allies to hold Erdogan accountable for attacking our Syrian Kurdish allies in the fight against ISIS. That's why Senator Graham and I and Senator Blackburn and others introduced bipartisan legislation to impose sanctions on Turkey. That's why the House of Representatives passed by an overwhelming and veto-proof to 16 sanctions against Turkey. That's why other bills have been introduced. It is now time for the United States Senate to act on this sanctions legislation. It doesn't matter to me whether it's the House-passed bill or the bill that we introduced or some other bill, but it is very important that we hold Turkey accountable by passing these sanctions measures. Let me just close by taking us back 5 years. This very time. This was a moment 5 years ago when the town of Kobani was under ISIS forces. ISIS had taken a lot of the villages around the town of Kobani. That attack had begun in early September, and on this time 5 years ago. The Syrian Kurds, our friends, asked for help in that battle against ISIS. It took us a little while, but in a few weeks we did the right thing. And then we, the United States, asked Turkey if they would help us to supply military equipment and other supplies to our Syrian Kurdish friends in Kobani and the fight against ISIS. President Erdogan said no. As a result of that, the United States had to airdrop equipment and supplies into the region, putting our pilots at greater risk. And after that moment, the United States worked very closely with our Syrian Kurdish friends in the SDF to push back ISIS, to take over that territory in northeastern Syria. In the course of that fight, the Syrian Kurds lost 11,000 soldiers, men and women and others, 11,000 people, in order to drive back ISIS. During that time, Turkey was allowing ISIS fighters to transit through its territory. It turned a blind eye to ISIS fighters that were going through Turkey as the power of ISIS was growing, and our allies were doing their best to defeat them. And as a result, we did geographically defeat ISIS, but that ideology remains alive and well. And as we know from the Pentagon Inspector General's report, what's happening now is given new oxygen and new life to ISIS. So this is a critical moment for all of us. We need to stand with our friends, end the betrayal of our Syrian Kurdish allies, and make sure that we hold Turkey accountable. So now it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to somebody who's just been fierce in making sure that we push back on Erdogan's decisions, actions, and aggression, Senator Marsha Blackburn.
Thank you. And I am truly pleased to drop by and spend a few moments with you today. And I want to begin by thanking you for taking the time to come, and thanking you for making your voice heard and your opinions known. We truly appreciate this, and we think it is important. I do have to ask, do I have any Tennesseans here? There we go. We love the fact that we have the diaspora there in Nashville, and it's a wonderful community. President Ahmed, it's so good to see you. Thank you all for being in the office yesterday and allowing us to continue to work with you. We do appreciate the opportunity to do that, and as Senator Van Hollen said, this is something that we have worked together on in a bicameral, bipartisan manner. And when people say things in a manner, and support for the Kurds is one of those. Just a couple of thoughts before I leave you all to your panel, which I think is going to be absolutely fantastic, and your further discussion. What we know is that Turkey and Russia executed their 8th patrol on Monday. We know that that is continuing. We are quite concerned with where this may lead us or what it may mean, and very concerned with the reports that we are hearing that even though Erdogan said he wasn't going to go into Kobani, that he may go in. And we are quite concerned about that. And I think it's important for Turkey and Russia to know that we are indeed watching and we are paying close attention to what is happening. Their actions are unacceptable, and the legislation that Senator Van Hollen spoke about is something that helps to send that message. Putting sanctions in place is something that we should do if they persist, because their actions do cause problems, not only for the Kurds, but they cause problems for the United States. Concerned too with airstrikes, and we know this means either protecting the Kurds from the air or closing the airspace. And our attention will continue to be focused there. We are keeping an eye on the oil fields that are there east of the Euphrates, and we certainly want to make sure that the issues are addressed and that the Kurds have the opportunity to take possession of those oil fields and benefit from that. I do under something that is a revenue stream for you all. So we are mindful and watchful. One of the things that I think is important to realize in this entire process as it is discussed, what Turkey and Russia are doing causes but happens when diplomatic ISIS will continue to push forward. We appreciate instability because it allows them to move in. We're very concerned about prisoners being released, the 80,000 that the SDF is currently holding, and the news that came out of the breakdown fences plan. This is information that was picked up through Iraq. Move forward with releasing these prisoners. We are watching what will happen with that and know that the SDF may need help as we look at this issue, because it's not just in Syria or a Syrian Kurd of the Mideast issue, and even pushing into the Horn of Africa. And I was in Djibouti and Mogadishu last weekend. And as you look at how ISIS has metastasized and how they are utilizing proxies to destabilize, you realize how vitally important it is for us to continue to support the Kurds, to make certain that these prisoners are not released and that further destabilization does not take place, whether it is Nigeria, whether it is the work with Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, or ISIS, just making certain that we continue to provide for protection and for stability, and that we remember who our allies are in this fight. And the Kurds have been a consistent ally. Thank you for letting me drop by and visit with you for a few minutes today.
Now we have the honor of having Senator Warner to give some remarks. Thank you very much, Senator, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. King. Senator Blackburn asked how many folks from Tennessee, how many from Virginia? All right. Did you ask how many in Maryland?
I have not.
Well, let me echo what my friend Chris Van Hollen said and Senator Blackburn said. It's important that you're here. It's important that your voices be heard. It's now a month and a half since the President of the United States, in one phone call, undermined our Kurdish allies, completely caught the American military, the American intelligence community, totally off guard, and threw the region into chaos. As a result of that telephone conversation, men and women of the SDF and other Kurdish allies who literally, up until that phone call, in many cases were standing with American military, are now subject to being killed, murdered. We've heard from Senator Van Hollen already. His comments about what we're seeing now is, I say this from my position as Vice Chairman of the Intelligence Committee, picking up on how we can monitor the ISIS prisoners who are detaining, who are fleeing. I think it's in many ways remarkable the Kurdish forces still keep as many of them incarcerated. But Senator Van Hollen's comments about the DOD Inspector General's report yesterday gives that independent validation that this move will lead to the reestablishment of ISIS in the region. That is not in the best interest of the Kurds. It is not in the best interest of the United States. It is not in the best interest of reasonable people throughout that region. And we will be paying a price for that for some time. I also think the President's decision to abandon the Kurds will be a disaster for American foreign policy for decades. How do we go back to allies or potential allies in a very troubled region and say, if you align with us and promote democratic values and promote human rights and stand with us, we will stand with you? One with no warning, in what appeared to be almost a whim, a complete reversal of American policy took place. Both my colleagues have said, who are the winners? Iran, Erdogan, Assad, Vladimir Putin, ISIS. These are not allies of the United States or the Kurdish people. One of the things, in one way, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Blackburn said, one way to the United States take action is to bring some level of sanction upon the Turks and the Erdogan government. I, like Senator, believe that those kind of actions, in terms of military action taken into that safe zone, shouldn't be rewarded with a White House visit. But that's now in the past. What we need to do, one thing that is the bare minimum we should do, is support legislation that I've put forward called the Syrian Allies Protection Act. What that says is very simply that the men and women, Kurdish men and women allies who had been working with the United States military or our intelligence services for at least 6 months ought to be protected on a going forward basis. We put forward programs like that to protect particularly translators, Iraqi translators, Afghani translators. Don't we owe the same obligation to those Kurdish forces who, with no warning at all, were left with frankly no viable path? Whether it would be danger from the Turkish militia, whether it be danger from ISIS escapees, whether it be danger from Assad forces. Do we really think, even if some other forces may be able to further align back with the Assad regime, do you really think an Assad regime is going to take somebody that worked with the American government? So the basic act of decency ought to be to ensure that the individuals are protected. We've got a program that's already been in place. There's appropriate vetting. Those folks who work with the American military and the intelligence community ought to get special immigrant visas. They ought to be relocated in region, or if not relocated, in the United States with their families. It is what a just and compassionate nation should and must do. Now, my hope would be, and one of my disappointments has been, I went down, we have kind of, Senator Van Hollen is a great co-sponsor of this legislation. We have the ability as senators to go down and go to the floor of the Senate and, in a sense, ask what's called unanimous consent, where we say, can we take a time out? It's not like we're doing much on the floor of the Senate these days anyway, and say, since this would be common decency, shouldn't we all agree that we should pass this unanimous? Unfortunately, somebody on the Republican side objected. So my hope would be when the panels, and as you try to think about bringing forward this message to congressional representatives all across, every day that we waste not passing the Syrian Allies Protection Act, the very people who worked with our military, the very people who we've heard oftentimes the military was asked to move out so quickly they didn't even have a chance to say thank you or goodbye. These people on a daily basis are being killed. So the most immediate thing we can do is put in place at least what we did similar to what we did with the Afghani and Iraqi translators and others. Least thing we could do is show that at least the honor of the American military and the intelligence community will be honored in protecting folks who work with us. We will not leave them behind, but we need immediate action from the Congress. And I commit to work with Senator Van Hollen and people of goodwill of both political parties to get this done and never, ever forget the contribution of the Syrian forces in that region. Thank you all very much.
All right, I'm just going to say a few words and then turn it over to you. Thank you, Senator Warner, and that's important legislation that he mentioned as well. And as I turn the podium back over to Dr. Karim, let me just again make the point that it's a very sad day in this country when the president takes an action where the winners are ISIS, Assad, Russia, Iran, and in this case, Erdogan as well, being rewarded for his actions with a visit to the White House. So that leaves it up to all of us to push back, to make sure that we make a statement that while parts of this damage are irreversible, we will salvage what we can. There are still things, including sending a message that when you undermine American national security interests, when you attack our friends and allies in the fight against ISIS, we don't just sit back, we don't issue an invitation to the White House, but we take action. And that's why it's important that we pass this sanctions legislation and that we do it as soon as possible. We would ask all of you to call upon Mitch McConnell. He's the Republican leader. He could call up these bills today. The House bill is sitting right on the Senate calendar. The bill that Senator Graham and I introduced, we also held that at the Senate calendar on the floor. This afternoon, if Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, wanted to bring it up, we could, and I'm absolutely confident that, like the House bill, the Senate bill would pass with an overwhelming veto-proof majority. So Senator McConnell needs to stop shielding the President of the United States and protecting him. Instead, we need to protect our interests around the world, make sure that we do right by our allies in the fight against ISIS, and pass this legislation. So thank all of you for being here. Again, to all the members of the panel, I'm going to get a full report on your comments. I did talk to Senator Graham, and he indicated he wanted to try and get by. He still may. But I should say that he is still very much supportive of moving forward with the sanctions legislation in order to send the right message in our country. President of the Syrian Democratic Council, Ilham Ahmed, again, thank you for your fortitude and for your leadership. Thank you all very much for being here. All right.
نبدأ.
Okay, well, you have heard the good remarks by all three senators, Republican and Democrats. Actually, for those who don't know, Chris Van Hollen has been involved with the Kurdish issue since 1988. He's the first to go to southeast Turkey, or Kurdistan of Turkey, in 1988, and inspected the refugee camps, those who escaped the Anfal campaign, and came back with a report that has documented the use of chemical weapons. So you could see how he is involved. And actually, he was the first one to get involved also in what he talked about, dropping weapons from the sky, because when Erdogan refused, I remember I was talking to him from Kurdistan, and he was getting in touch with, we introduced him to Salah Muslim, because he speaks English, and Salah Muslim with Chris, they were talking to NSC and Deputy Secretary of State, and that's how the airdrops and help started. So he's really not new to this since this started. He believes in it, and really all the other senators as well. For panel, we have actually to vacate this room by 3:30, unfortunately. So we're going to have great panelists. Most of you know Ms. Ilham Ahmed. She's the co-chair of the administration in northern Syria. We have our friend, former representative from Turkish Parliament, Dr. Aykan Endemir. Thank you for coming, Aykan. And most of you probably have heard Amy Holmes, who's almost like a resident of Rojava, and knows all the faces, all the people there, and you know, she has written objectively but passionately on the issues. So without further delay, we will proceed with our panel. And thank you all for coming. It's great to see you all. Michael, it's always good to have everybody else as well. Okay. Now, Ms. Ilham Ahmed will start her remarks.
أشكركم على الحضور وأشكر كل من شارك في هذه الندوة وأعضاء الكونغرس الذين قدموا دعمهم المستمر إلى هذه اللحظة، وأشكر الرأي العام الأمريكي والشعب الأمريكي بشكل عام وكل من وقف إلى جانبنا في هذه المحنة العصيبة.
I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'd like to thank all of you who contributed to our cause, the member of Congress who stood with us from the first day, and to the American people who supported us.
بالطبع أنتم أيضا تراقبون الوضع في سوريا يعني خلال ال8 أعوام الماضية وما تعرضت له من حروب داخلية ومداخلات تدخلات خارجية.
I'm sure you have been following up the situation in Syria since 8 years, the civil war that we went through, and also the foreign intervention that happened in Syria.
الحرب العالمية الثالثة التي تدور يعني التي يتم الحديث عنها حاليا تدور روحها في رقعة صغيرة من الجغرافيا السورية.
It's another world war that is taking place in a very small part of the world in Syria.
شمال شرق سوريا المنطقة الجغرافيا التي تشكل ثلث الأراضي السورية كان لها تاريخ من الديمقراطية منذ بدء الأزمة السورية.
Northeastern Syria, which makes up about 1/3 of Syria, they had a history since 8 years of having a democratic experience.
عفرين، كوباني، قامشلي، ومن بعدها الرقة ودير الزور. هذه المناطق كلها كانت نموذج للديمقراطية.
Kobani, Afrin, Kamishli, and later Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, they became a model of democracy in Syria.
نظام علماني
We had a secular system
يؤمن بالتعددية،
which believe in a pluralistic governing,
المساواة بين الجنسين،
gender equality,
إضافة إلى حرية العقيدة والحقوق القومية لكل شعب.
freedom of religion, and the nationalistic and ethnic rights for the different people,
وحرية الفرد.
and the individual freedom.
هذا النموذج فقط بني في هذه المنطقة تحت ظل الإدارة الذاتية وبحماية قوات سوريا الديمقراطية.
This is the only model that was built in our area under the protection of the Syrian Democratic Forces and under the management of the autonomous administration of northeastern Syria.
كل المكونات تشاركت في إقامة هذا النظام وإدارته.
All different components have contributed together to manage this system that we were able to build.
الكرد، العرب، السوريان، تركمان، أرمن، أشور، إيزيديين، إسلام ومسيحيين.
Kurds, Arabs, Armenian, Assyrian, Syriac, Yazidi, Christians, we all participated together to build this system.
لكن هذه الإدارة تعرضت بشكل دائم لتهديدات الدولة التركية.
However, we were always subjected to threats by the Turkish state.
في 2018 تعرضت مدينة عفرين التي هي مدينتي لهجوم تركي شرس.
The city of Afrin in 2018, it was subjected to a brutal Turkish aggression. Afrin is my city as well.
المدينة التي كانت تديرها امرأة.
The city of Afrin was managed by a woman.
اليوم تدار من قبل فصائل إسلامية راديكالية.
Now it's managed by reactionary Islamist groups.
يتعرض ناسها وسكانها لشتى أنواع الانتهاكات.
People of Afrin are subhuman rights, looting properties,
الخطف والقتل،
kidnapping and killing,
الترهيب،
terrorizing the civilians,
تتريك المنطقة،
Turkification of the area,
التهجير القسري لسكان المنطقة.
forced displacement to the indigenous people of the area.
هذا هو النموذج الذي تتحدث عنه تركيا على أنها منطقة آمنة، وهو النموذج الذي تؤمن به.
This is the so-called safe zone that Turkey is promoting for and that Turkey believe in.
سكان عفرين الأصليين يعيشون على مسافة 10 كيلومتر من بيوتهم وقراهم، لكنهم غير قادرون، ممنوع عليهم الرجوع إلى بيوتهم.
People of Afrin, they live now far away from their hometowns, about 9 miles away from their hometowns, and they cannot go back to their houses.
في 9 الشهر العاشر تعرضت رأس العين سريكانية وتل أبيض هذه المنطقة لهجوم تركي آخر.
On October the 9th, Sarikani, Ras Al Ain, and Tal Abyad, they were also subjected to another Turkish aggression.
وتم احتلال هذه المنطقة إلى التركية عن طريق الفصائل الإسلامية الراديكالية.
And this area was occupied by the Turkish state through its proxies, the Islamist factions.
ومن يوم بدء المعارك وحتى الآن تم ارتكاب العديد من المجازر أو الانتهاكات.
Since the beginning of the incursion, many blatant violation have occurred in the area.
فسكان هذه المنطقة أيضا مهجرون.
The people of these areas have been displaced as well.
وممنوع عليهم الرجوع.
They cannot go back to their home.
إضافة إلى أنهم بدأوا بتوطين العوائل التي كانت موجودة في تركيا والتي هم عوائل الفصائل الإسلامية.
And now they are settling new people in these areas. Most of them are family member of the militia fighter, Islamist fighter that fight with Turkey.
نعم، نحن قاتلنا داعش إلى جانب قوات التحالف ضمن إطار تحالف دولي.
Yes, we fought against ISIS with the global coalition to defeat ISIS.
وحققنا نجاحات كبيرة فيه.
And I would say we achieved great success.
لكن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية والقوى الدولية اعتمدت الجانب العسكري فقط.
However, the United States and the international community who helped us, they only relied on the military support to us.
وهي لم تقبل التعامل معنا كطرف سياسي لها مشروع دين يصبح بديلا للنظام.
Never dealt with us as a political entity that believe in democracy and that has a project for all over Syria.
فعندما نقارن بين مشروع النظام ومشروع الفصائل ومشروع الذي بنيناه في المنطقة في إدلب والمناطق التي تقع تحت سيطرة الفصائل إسلامي راديكالي.
If we look at all the projects in Syria, all the governing model in Syria, you have in Idlib the Islamist factions, you have the Assad regime, and you have us. If we look at the factions that are governing Idlib, it's apparently, obviously, an Islamist project.
لا وجود للمرأة ضمن مشروع الإسلامي الراديكالي.
Women actionary Islamic project.
ويوميا عمليات التفجير والقطف والقتل والتعذيب موجودة في تلك المنطقة.
We are in daily basis. This area about violation, human rights violation, kidnapping, killing, and torturing.
والفصائل هي التي ترتكب هذه الجرائم.
And most of these.
النظام المناطق التي تقع تحت سيطرة النظام لا تزال تحافظ على النظام المركزي الشوفيني البعثي.
As for the areas controlled by the regime of Assad, they are still keeping the status quo of totalitarian mentality of governing, centralized, very centralized.
هناك أيضا لا يوجد حرية للمرأة.
You don't have freedom for women in that part of Syria as well.
ولا يوجد تعددية فيها.
And there is no pluralism.
الطابع الموجود هو الطابع الطائفي القومي.
It's very sectarian and very nationalistic.
ذو الحزب الواحد.
Totalitarian that believe in the rule of one party, single party.
فالاستقرار الحقيقي الذي كنا يمكن أن نتحدث عنه فقط كان موجود في شمال وشرق.
The only real stability that we can really speak about is the stability that we were able to achieve in northeastern Syria.
لكن عدم التعامل مع هذا المشروع وعدم إشراكه في العملية السياسية بجنيف هو حقيقة عملية إقصاء مقصودة لهذا المشروع، ونرى بأنه من الضروري أن يتم تغيير الرؤية والنظرة لهذا المشروع.
But the fact that we are not acknowledged politically, that we are not represented in Geneva peace talk, all the UN peace talks on Syria, is meaning that they want to exclude us by intention. There is an intention to exclude us from any process.
كل الدول أخبرتنا بأن هناك فيتو تركي.
All the countries, all the friendly countries, they told us that there is a Turkish veto.
ونحن سألنا هل من المعقول أن تكون تركيا هي الدولة الرئيسة والحاكمة في العالم بأجمعه؟
And I always asked, would it be possible that Turkey is the country that is controlling all over the world? Why everybody is kowtowing to the Turkish state?
مع الأسف من لم يرد الاعتراف بهذا المشروع تحججوا بأن هناك فيتو تركي على المشروع.
Countries who did acknowledge us, they told us there is a Turkish veto.
إلى أن تم فتح المجال أمام الهجوم التركي كي يوجه ضربته للمشروع الديمقراطي.
And it stayed like this up until they allowed Turkey to attack our areas.
لذلك أقول بأن تركيا حقيقة هي تستهدف المشروع الديمقراطي في سوريا.
So Turkey is targeting the democratic project in Syria.
وهي تسعى لتطهير عرقي لكل المكونات الموجودة فيها.
And the components that inhabit the region.
المسيحيون أيضا مهددون من قبل الدولة.
The Syrian Christians are really threatened by the Turkish state.
وحتى العرب المتنورين أيضا مهددون من قبل.
The moderate Arabs, the enlightened Arabs that lives in our area, they are also threatened by the Turkish state.
لذلك هنا نلتمس من الرأي العام الأمريكي.
So this is what we seek, what we want the American public opinion to know.
بأن يتم إيقاف هذه المقتلة التركية التي أعلنتها ضد شعبنا وضد الشعب السوري.
To stop this slaughtering that Turkey announced against our people and against generally.
وأن تعمل على دعم المشروع الديمقراطي الموجود في
and to enable and support the democratic project that we built in our area.
فمن الضروري إخراج تلك الفصائل من المنطقة التي احتلتها.
It's very important to put the factions that occupied the area between Tal Abyad and Rais Al Ain outside of this area. They should not stay in this area.
ويتم إعلان المنطقة على أنها منطقة منزوعة السلاح.
This area should be demilitarized.
ومعاقبة الفصائل ووضعها على قائمة الإرهاب.
These factions should be sanctioned and should be listed on the terrorist list.
نسبة ما مارستهم من إرهاب حقيقي على في المنطقة.
Because of their actions, the terrorist activities against our people, and region.
ومعاقبة الدولة التركية على ما أقدمت عليه من ارتكاب جرائم من خلال هذه الفصائل، وهي نفسها أيضا التي استخدمت أسلحة الناتو ضدنا.
Also putting sanctions on the Turkish state who supported and enabled these factions and also used NATO weapons against our people.
وإلا سنرى بأن الإرهاب يعيد إنتاج نفسه ويستمر بترهيب الدول وضرب استقرار وأمنهم في كل دول العالم.
Otherwise, we are seeing the terrorist groups reproducing themselves and targeting not only our people but all the countries of the world.
وشكرا.
And thank you all.
George Pass. Before we go to our next panelist, really all of Kurdistan is under attack. When I say Kurdistan, that means not just the Kurds, Turkmens, Arabs, Christians who live in Kurdistan. Today we can see what's going on in Turkey. Elected mayors are being dismissed and appointed ones who support AKP government and Erdogan are put in their places. Elected members of parliaments have been put in prison for no reason, except that they object to Erdogan's policies. In Iran and in Iraq, we see uprising by the people who are unhappy with what's going on. If you follow the news, you see the most fierce stance is in Iranian Kurdistan, and most of the killing actually is happening in Mariwan, in other Kurdish cities in Iran. In Iraq, you all remember, it was just a little over 2 years ago when the policies, the representatives of the United States in Iraq at that time, for their zeal against the referendum, they made statements that actually emboldened the Shia militias, the Iraqi government that's controlled by Iran, and also emboldened the Iranians to attack Kirkuk. And today Kirkuk is occupied by the militias. And this was under the guise of, we believe, in Iraq's territorial integrity. I just thought that's important to make a remark, since this, I know our panel is mostly about Syria and northeast Syria. And I like to say one thing is, despite what we have been through in the past couple of years, of course, Afrin followed Kirkuk. We all remember that. So because when it happens, it's like a domino theory. It goes from place to place. And if you all remember Erdogan's map at the UN, you know where he wants to go. From Aleppo to Sinjar to Mosul to Kirkuk, all the way to Suleimania border. This is the Ottoman map that he showed there. That's what he wants to do. So Iraqi Kurdistan actually is in danger as well if a stop is not put to it. Our next speaker is Dr. Erdemir. Like I said, he's a former member of Turkish parliament. He is with the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. He has been critic of Erdogan's regime, and he's most familiar about what's. Just before I turn it to him, SDF is not PKK. SDF is people of northern Syria who all together are resisting dictatorship, and they are resisting Turkish aggression and occupation. And the solution, in my opinion, to all of this is for the Turkish government, and we'll listen what our friend is, to engage in negotiations with the PKK. They have been trying to eliminate PKK since 1984, and even before that, actually. And all the losers in this are the people of Turkey and others. And Turkey is not PKK is not a terrorist organization. PKK hasn't fought anyone else. They haven't done anything against the US. And Erdogan himself negotiated with them for several years. And even before the last Istanbul election, they went to Mr. Öcalan and they asked him to make a statement. So their candidate, Mr. Not Imamoglu there. No. The former president of the parliament.
Binali Yıldırım.
Binali Yıldırım. So he makes a statement on his behalf. So some statement was attributed to Öcalan about that, but it didn't work because the people of Turkey had decided what to do. But one criticism I have of the CHP is they were the ones who really helped pass this law in the Turkish parliament to take immunity from the parliamentarians that has led to imprisoned members, but also CHP members. With that, Dr. Erdemir. Thank you.
Dr. Karim. Dr. Karim, thank you for the kind invitation and the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be speaking here today, and also thank you for making space for a Turkish voice at a Kurdish panel, since we are used to having a lot of Turkish panels in DC without any Kurdish voice. So I think this sets a good example. Now, my task has been, I've been asked to give you a brief overview of the Turkish side of this saga, because we have heard a lot about what's happening in the Syrian theater of action. But equally important is what's happening in the Turkish theater of action. Now, there are two sides to this story within official discourse. And when you read Turkey's media, which is owned and controlled by Erdogan up to 95%, you hear a single voice that this is an existential threat that's dealt through security measures. So what is the existential threat? The official discourse is part of the story is much more complicated. Let me tell you why at this very time, if you go back to October 8th, why Erdogan was in a, let's say, in a difficult position and had to act. Those of you who follow Turkish politics might remember the corruption probe of December 2013. This is when all of Turkey woke up to a scandal showing that Erdogan's ministers were on the payroll of Iran, and they were helping Iran evade US sanctions through Turkey's second largest public lender, Halkbank, to the tune of $20 billion or more. And tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, were paid as bribe to members of the Turkish government. Now, back then, Erdogan's job approval rating fell, meaning those who do not approve Erdogan's job rating was up to 47%. So almost half of Turkey was against him. In the run-up to the October cross-border proposed, Erdogan's job performance to 6%, meaning Erdogan was in an equally difficult position compared to the December 2013 graft probe, meaning he was in a very difficult position. Why, you might wonder? For three reasons. One, he lost elections, local elections, not once but twice. First in March, then in the Istanbul rerun in June. June, Erdogan lost control of 2/3 of Turkey's GDP to the opposition and half the population to the opposition. And for the first time since Erdogan's rise to power in 2002, there was a winning bloc that brought right and left, secular and religious, Turks and Kurds. And of course, the kingmakers were the pro-Kurdish HDP. So that was Erdogan's first existential threat. This is not Turkey's existential threat, this is Erdogan's existential threat. The second existential threat was that two of Erdogan's very close allies, aides, colleagues, one, the former Prime Minister Davutoğlu, the other one, the economic miracle kid, Deputy Prime Minister Ali Babacan, were on their way to set up two splinter parties, attracting more and more members of the AKP to their ranks. To make matters worse, former President Abdullah Gül was also providing his support, lending his support to Ali Babacan's party. Just to tell you how severe a crisis this is, within the last year, Erdogan lost almost 1 million members of the AKP. When he was asked about it, he said, oh, these are just the old members dying off. So unless all of AKP's members are suddenly dying, there seems to be a serious exodus from the AKP, and that was Erdogan's second problem. And the third one hits very close at home. Erdogan's third existential economy, which is run by no other than his son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, who is Turkey's Minister of Finance and Treasury, has brought Turkey to its worst economic crisis in decades. And hence, Erdogan had an urgent need to divert the electorate's attention away from the economic crisis at home, caused by his own mismanagement and waste, as well as the mismanagement and corruption of his son-in-law. Personal existential problems. Erdogan, who I still argue is one of the most cunning politicians ever in the Turkish political history, has managed to convince the Turkish public that his existential problem is actually a national existential problem about the PKK in Syria. So when we take a look at the polls to see whether Erdogan has succeeded, I would like to say, unfortunately, yes. In the polls, when asked about the Syria operation, 79% approve the operation. Those who oppose it or who are indifferent are only at 21%. Now, what does this tell us? Given Erdogan today enjoys less than 50% support, together with his far-right ultra-nationalist allies, the MHP, it means that he managed to convince more than 20% of the opposition to back the military incursion into northeast Syria, which gives us with a remaining 21%, which one might argue is maybe 12 percentage point is the pro-Kurdish HDP, and roughly 9 percentage point is the center-left CHP, which shows Erdogan in a brilliant manner has not only undermined the winning coalition bloc, but he has also split the main opposition CHP right at the center. You know, CHP has historically been the site of an ongoing struggle between the more liberal, pluralist, inclusive wing and the more nationalist, illiberal wing. And hence, this crisis has also split the party right at the center. And again, so for Erdogan, this was multiple wins in one. I know our time is limited, and so I will very quickly try to end with a word of hope that this is not Turkey's destiny, this is not Syria's, northeast Syria's destiny, that this is not the destiny of the Kurds, that there is another way forward. And just to be provocative enough, because if I speak to you as a, you know, as a believer in the Kurdish peace process, you will say, well, you know what, you are a minority within Turkey, you are a minority within the ranks of the CHP, so why should we take you seriously? So let me try to convince you by rebutting Erdogan's points with someone very influential, by Erdogan himself. I will use a younger Erdogan to go against Erdogan's current talking points. Let me give you 3 examples. Of all the leaders in Turkey, Erdogan was the first one who took the risk to start the Kurdish peace process and to initiate talks with the PKK. And I was one of the 111 opposition politicians who signed what was back then called 111 signatures for peace. We opposed Erdogan on almost every single policy issue, but we argued this is the right step. Again, I was very vocal. I said, we're doing this wrong. It will fail because this is not the way, this is not the proper way to run a peace process, but nevertheless, it's a brave movement. It's a brave move, and we should support it. The second issue, again, of all the Turkish political leaders, it was Erdogan who transformed Turkish thinking about the Kurdistan regional government. To this day, in the Turkish media, you will read a lot of insults concerning Iraqi Kurds, that they are bandits, they're rebels, they're barbarians, like really racist slurs. But it was Erdogan who showed Turks and Kurds in Turkey that the KRG could be a good neighbor, could be a great trade partner, and could be a security, net security provider for Turkey. And again, Erdogan deserves credit for that. And third, which many people have missed, but back in February 2015, when Turkey was worried about the tomb of Süleyman Shah, the father of the founder of the Ottoman Empire, Osman, it was thanks to a collaboration between the Turkish military and intelligence and the YPG that the operation was a success. And I've always argued when Turks and Syrian Kurds joined hands, there was only one loser, ISIS, the Islamic State. Now, the sad part of the story is the 3 Erdogans I just presented to you, had he tried to do these again today, he would be jailed by the current Erdogan. But nevertheless, I think we should still be inspired by that earlier Erdogan, who, like a broken clock, showed the right time twice a day, in this case 3 times, by taking the right moves when it comes to the Kurdish question. So it is my hope that Turkish citizens across the political spectrum will begin to see that the real threat, the real existential threat to Turkish democracy, to Turkish people, is the Islamic State, is the Islamist proxies Turkey currently works with, is the authoritarian regime at home, and not Kurds in Iran, Iraq, Syria, or Turkey. I believe together we can build an inclusive, pluralistic Middle East. And it is, I think, crucial that Turks and Kurds learn to work together to defeat all sorts of extremism and bigotry in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening speech and good numbers. You have had it. It's really interesting if you follow the numbers you gave. So, but I agree with you. I think the only way to have peace is to have good relationship between all the peoples of that area, Kurds, Turks, Arabs, Persians, and all of that. And for Turkey, it's really critical because Turkey has the most borders with it's important to have that. And you're right, Erdogan, they reached the agreement, the Dolmabahce agreement, in February. He came back a month after that, even before the elections, and declared that agreement null and void for the elections of 2015. When he failed, he went to another election, and this time he band together with MHP, and we know the rest would happen. Our last panelist, not the least, is Professor Amy Holmes, who's well known to most of you. Like I said, she has been a part-time resident of Rojava. I think she has been, I don't know if I'm right, banned from her other part-time home in Cairo, but she's going to talk to us about the situation in Rojava, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Ika.
All right, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and to the organizers, the Washington Kurdish Institute, for inviting me here. A lot has already been said, but I want to make a few points that I think we've not spoken about so far. So the previous, my esteemed colleagues and speakers have spoken about how this Turkish incursion that began on October 9 has displaced approximately 300,000 people from the border between the borderlands of northern Syria, where the Turkish-backed militias operate under the umbrella of the Syrian National Army, which include groups that are known for their brutality, including Ahrar al-Shakir, Jaish al-Islam, Sultan Murad, Al-Jabha al-Shamia, Hamza Brigade, and others. On October 12, Hevrin Khalaf, a Kurdish female politician and head of the Syria Future Party, was captured and executed by Ahrar al-Shakir. Amnesty International referred to her murder and other summary executions as war crimes. In recent testimony, Syria envoy Ambassador James Jeffrey acknowledged that the State Department was investigating war crimes, in the plural, committed by Turkey and Turkish-backed rebels. And in a leaked memo that was reported by the New York Times, Ambassador William Robeck, the top American diplomat on the ground working in northern Syria, wrote, and I quote, "Turkey's military operation in northern Syria, spearheaded by armed Islamist groups on its payroll, represents an intentioned, laced effort at ethnic cleansing," end quote. Now, on October 17, a ceasefire was negotiated when Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo were dispatched to Ankara, and this ceasefire agreement was presented as an accomplishment because it purported to end the Turkish military operations. However, it did not. In fact, Turkey has violated this ceasefire agreement multiple times. Turkey has also violated the agreement that they made with Russia, as Senator Van Hollen mentioned. And what happened in the ceasefire agreement on October 17 is that a swath of land, for those of you who are not familiar with the geography of northern Syria, this swath of land is between Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain, or Serikani in Kurdish. So Ras Al Ain is the Arab name of the town, Serikani is the Kurdish name of the town. Now, this was presented by President Trump and others as, a success because it meant a ceasefire. Turkey actually only referred to it as, I believe, a pause in operation, so they didn't even actually call it a ceasefire. But what this agreement actually did was it essentially meant that this swath of land, that more sovereign, Syrian territory, has essentially been ceded to Turkey. And part of this territory, including Ras Al Ain, was in fact the second deadliest site of the Armenian genocide. So 1 century after the Armenians were killed in the genocide, which the House of Representatives has just recognized, the ancestors and the descendants of those genocide survivors are now once again fleeing from Turkey and Turkish-backed extremists. When President Erdogan visited the White House last week, President Trump failed to mention the ethnic cleansing campaign, and he failed to mention the assault on the descendants of the Armenian genocide survivors. So in 1915, long-held fears of territorial dismemberment and anti-Armenian sentiment led the Ottoman Turkish government to launch a brutal campaign against its Armenian population, who were killed, forced into Muslim households, or deported into remote areas to perish. Ras Al Ain Serikani became one of 25 concentration camps where deported Armenians from Anatolia were settled temporarily. Then in 1916, the Ottoman government ordered the massacre of Armenians in 2 major camps, Ras Al Ain and Deir ez-Zor is the other, where an estimated 70,000 Armenians in Ras Al Ain alone, not including Deir ez-Zor, just in Ras Al Ain, an estimated 70,000 Armenians were killed by Turkey and their militias. They were buried in mass graves or just left in open fields and not buried at all, and the bones of the victims can still be found today. Those who survived put down roots in the area, which enabled a multi-ethnic society to develop in northeastern Syria. The current cross-border operation, however, seeks to change these dynamics permanently. Houses owned by Armenians, as well as other Christian and Kurdish families, are being looted by Turkish-backed militias. Taken by Al-Jabha al-Shamiyya has been scrolled on the gates of their homes to signal to other Turkish-commanded militias that the property has already been confiscated. Since the start of the Turkish assault, known as Operation Peace Spring, over 200 civilians have been killed and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. All of the estimated 30 to 40 Armenian families living in this region recently ceded to Turkey have fled. And Armenians also now under the attack by the Islamic State. Recently, Pastor Ibrahim Hevsat Bedo, an Armenian Catholic priest, and his father were killed by ISIS gunmen while traveling to Deir ez-Zor to restore an Armenian Catholic church. So, what I would like to propose now are a few recommendations for how we could move forward, because the current status quo, I think, is unacceptable. First, the United States needs to have a team on the ground monitoring the situation, documenting the abuses, documenting these war crimes, and documenting the other violations that are being committed. Amen. The United States should also establish a fact-finding commission to study the connections between Turkey and the Islamic State. Why were thousands of ISIS militants allowed to travel freely back and forth between Turkey and Syria for years? Why was Baghdadi found just 3 miles from the Turkish border? This independent fact-finding commission, I believe, should also include a delegation, perhaps some members of Congress could join us, to visit Afrin and the other regions of northern Syria that are currently occupied by Turkey. Because if Erdogan is actually proud of what he's doing and thinks that it's a model that he wants to continue now in this new land that's been ceded to him between Ras Al Ain and Sarakani, he should welcome a delegation from the United States. He should welcome scholars and journalists and members of Congress to come and see what they're doing. Why not? I conducted a survey of the Syrian Democratic Forces. Copies of it are outside. I was given access by the Syrian Democratic Council, the SDC and the SDF, to all 6 regions of northeastern Syria that are under their control. So they had nothing to hide. They allowed me to conduct my research. They allowed me to do my work as a scholar, as an academic. So Turkey should also allow academics and journalists access to their regions that they control. If they're proud of what they're doing and if they think what they're doing is in accordance with international human rights laws, then please allow a delegation from the United States to visit Afrin, Ras Al Ain, Sarakani, and the other areas that are currently under Turkish control. I also believe that we need to seriously consider a mechanism for border security. This could be based, for example, if we're thinking in the future on something along the lines of the multilateral force, the MFO, that has successfully protected the border between Egypt and Israel since 1981. The German Minister of Defense, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, she suggested also a security mechanism that would include Russia and Turkey to protect the border. Now, the global coalition to defeat the Islamic State, as I'm sure all of you know, it includes 81 countries. So it shouldn't be the United States alone, but together with those 81 countries, we should be able to protect the border between Turkey and Syria. That does not include simply ceding land from Syria to Turkey. And finally, the United States needs to pressure the United Nations to include the Syrian Democratic Council in the negotiations in Geneva. It is unacceptable that 1/3 of Syria is excluded from the talks about the future of Syria. And so, in addition to our continued cooperation with the SDF, we also need to pressure for their political inclusion in order to find a resolution to the future of the Syrian conflict. And that can only be done if all members of Syrian society are included in these talks in Geneva, and that includes the self-administration of northeast Syria. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much for excellent remarks. Like I said, because of the time limit, we have really short time for a few questions. And please try to make it questions, not statements. So let's start. Joe?
Question would be for visiting conscientious concerned professional staffers and members who want to follow. Is there any place that the panel should recommend that's finding the truth, that's objective and reliable and real-time current? You talk about having monitors on the ground that suggest to me that may be a challenge. Is there any place people can look if they're going to be able to devote 15 minutes a day and they want to really catch up on what's happened in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, I think for that, I'll let Amy, but I think for that is probably there should be a sort of organization to have like a website and something to put the news on that. I think there are some actually, but most of them are not in, probably not in English language, but that's a very important point, I think.
There's the Rojava Information Center I recommend. Rojava Information Center, RIC. You can look at their website. They have many reports, and they've worked with many journalists who've come to the region, and they have an extensive coverage also in English. So that's what I would recommend.
And if I'm allowed to give a humorous answer, I would recommend contacting Turkish prisons. We have the top journalists and academics who work on the issue in Turkish prisons.
Some of them get like 2-3 days off from prison and they get back in. Just happened recently. Evin?
There are things that are happening that are within the mandate of ICRC, for example. The Geneva Convention and additional protocols are being violated. And I am wondering why such organizations are not participating regarding human rights across humanitarian and human rights violations.
تذكري جواب؟
يعني حاليا ما في منظمات بالداخل تشتغل لا بالجانب الإنساني ولا بمجال حقوق الإنسان.
Currently, most of the organization in Syria that they work in these fields, they left. Neither those who work on the humanitarian or on the documentation issue.
مع بدء المعارك كل المنظمات اللي كانت موجودة انسحبت.
When Turkey started the incursion, most of the organization left Syria.
وبعفرين ممنوع دخول أي منظمة إليها.
Afrin, no organization is allowed to come to Afrin. It's forbidden.
كي لا يتم تسجيل الارتكابات
Because
أو
they don't want
الانتهاكات.
anybody to document the violations in Afrin.
Okay.
And can I give a very quick answer to that too? One word answer is realpolitik. As someone who believes in international law and how effective international courts can be, we have seen really the shameful failure of the European Court of Human Rights when it comes to human rights violations within Turkey. As you know, Strasbourg refrains from declaring that Turkish courts are no longer an effective legal remedy because they simply don't want the workload, plus they don't want to, I guess, alienate the Turkish government. In practice, let's say, in letter, international law and international courts mean a lot, but in practice, there seemed to be a realpolitik obstacle to using them effectively.
That's exactly right. Judy?
So we've heard a lot of legislation sanctioning Turkey, but in the meantime, Kurds are dying. Has one get humanitarian aid to the Kurds who are being slaughtered?
I think the humanity is trickling in very little. A lot of the people mobilized in Iraqi Kurdistan, for example, every city, they started on their own. But that's really not enough. It's just minuscule. It doesn't reach most of the people who have been displaced. But I will let Ms. Ilham see what she has to say on this.
كما ذكرت أن المنظمات انسحبت مع بدء المعارك.
As I said earlier, answering your question also, that most of the NGOs organization they left after the Turkish incursion.
والدول الدول الداعمة أوقفت دعمها لهذه المنظمات.
And the countries that provide grants and funds for these organizations that work on the ground, they stopped their programs.
حتى بعض التقارير التي تسجلها بعض المنظمات تظهر وكأنه هناك حركة رجوع للنازحين إلى القرى والمدن، وهذا بعيد غير صحيح.
Unfortunately, some of the NGOs are biased to Turkey even. They are saying that a lot of the IDPs has returned back to these areas, which is not true at all.
أي أنها تقدم تقارير غير صحيحة.
So they are providing misleading information, some of these organizations.
يعني يوجد حركة رجوع من تركيا إلى هذه المناطق، لكن الناس الأصليين الذين نزحوا إلى الداخل لم ترجع إلى قراهم.
It's true there are people who are coming from Turkey to be resettled in this area, people that Turkey chose, but people who fled this area to our areas, they never dare to go back.
You know, unfortunately, the so-called United Nations, which is really a club of states that are members, they haven't been helpful at all, not just there, you know, everywhere, as far as I know, in Kurdistan. In Syria, they have had a representative there who is representative of the General Secretary. They have never pushed for including the Syrian Kurds within the negotiations, whether it was the Mistura or this new one. And I think they have Kurdish participation in it, which is not true, because 1/3 of Syria itself is not representative in it. That's the most representative area of all the groups in Syria, because it has all the communities: Christians, Muslims, Yazidis. Then you have non-Kurds like Assyrians, you have Arabs, you have Turkmens in it. So unfortunately, that's a reality, and I think that's another example of the realpolitik that you talked about. Mustafa, you had something?
التي سوف تجعل منظمات أخرى تأتي، وكما ذكرت إيمي ممكن هذا يساهم بإرسال من أجل مراقبة الوحشيات في يوغوسلافيا. كانوا موجودين في السوفيت عندما انفصل الاتحاد السوفيتي في الإقليم بين كازاخستان وأرمينيا أيضا كانوا موجودين.
Yeah, you know, I have my own experience with the UN in Kirkuk when I was there. We had 700,000 IDPs, almost all of them Sunni Arabs, in Kirkuk. And we had a UN humanitarian representative in Baghdad. They really never did anything about, you know, to help those people. Very little, if any. I don't mean to argue. I'm just telling you about my own experience. You know, just documenting, we have a lot of things documented. We have the Armenian genocide documented. We have the Anfal campaign documented. What has come of it? We need, these people are suffering today. These people are hungry, they're homeless, what can we do for them today? Documentation is good for history, but let's...
Not only for documentation, also to get engaged,
Yeah.
provide humanitarian aid,
Yeah.
to make sure that
Okay.
they will not, the Turkish government will not expand its
Okay.
incursion.
Okay, last question.
مش مكانه لاموا لأنه المجلس الشيوعي يبرر قانون الجمهوريين. جيش ضد تمرير قانون هو ممكن امتى ممكن يعمل
Well, let's see if she has met with him.
met him yet.
So,
لكن أرى أن من الضروري أن يحدث هذا اللقاء
However, I see it's important that I meet him
لأوصل له رسالتي،
so I can deliver the message.
وإن لم ألتقي بالتأكيد ستصله رسالتي.
If I couldn't meet him, I'm sure that my message to him would be delivered to him.
okay, before we take the last question, I'd like just to mention that today's meeting, really we have our turnout is great. We had 3 senators coming and speaking, and I like to acknowledge the efforts that Yusuf put into organizing this, and of course, Senator Van Hollen and his office have been instrumental in getting us the room, and himself actually asking the other senators to come. So it's, that's why it's so important, grassroots connection with members of Congress. It really, that's the way will get us things, We have to do it, everybody, yourself, your neighbor, your relative, whoever you have to do it grassroots. Congressman, even your councilman or your school board. That's how you get into the system here. It's not anything else. People think that you have to pay millions of dollars to know a senator. That's not true. So it's really very important for us to work on grassroots level, everybody where they live in their neighborhood. At least that's my experience, and it pays off, really. Last question, you.
My question is also for President Ahmed. Earlier, Senator Blackburn had made some comments regarding oil fields that are under American control. I understand that in the past you've made some comments critical of that policy.
وأنت انتقدت هذه السياسة سابقا أنه فقط حماية النفط، فما هو موقفك الحالي حول ذلك الموضوع؟ بأي شكل من الأشكال والتواجد الأمريكي في هذه الحقول قد يكون إشكالي.
نحن نرى بأن الموارد الطبيعية في سوريا هي ملك للشعب السوري.
I see that the natural resources of Syria is owned by the Syrian people.
وضروري جدا أن يتم حماية هذه المنابع
And it's
البترولية.
important to secure and protect these oil resources.
لكن هذه المنابع لن تكون محمية إن تعرضت المناطق الحدودية للهجوم التركي.
However, speaking about securing oil feed only wouldn't be enough because they would not be protected if our northern border is still vulnerable or open to the Turkish aggression.
الأمريكان تحدثوا عن 3 أهداف لبقائهم في
The
سوريا.
US mentioned 3 points for the reasons they want to stay in Syria.
أحدها حماية آبار
One of
البترول
it securing the oil field,
والاستمرار بمحاربة الإرهاب
the sustainable continuation of defeating ISIS,
ومواجهة التمدد الإيراني.
and to stop the Iranian expansion.
لكن هذه الأهداف ال3 لن تتحقق إن كانت هناك معارك تدور على الحدود مع تركيا.
These 3 goals are not achievable if Turkey is continuing with its aggression from the north.
فالحفاظ على استقرار هذه المناطق ضروري جدا لكي يتم الاستمرار بمحاربة الإرهاب.
In order to continue the defeating ISIS and terrorism, we need to enforce stability in these areas.
والفصائل التي أتت بها تركيا إلى هذه المنطقة هي فصائل إرهابية غالبية قياداتهم كانوا أمراء داعش من الدير الزور والرقة والطبقة والمناطق الأخرى.
The FSA group, the factions that were brought by Turkey to our region, most of them were leaders in ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they brought them to our area.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we conclude our event today, and I want to thank our panelists, all of them. And thank you all for coming.
شكرا لكم.
God bless you. Keep up the good work.